This episode of the Better Every Shift podcast is sponsored by Verizon Frontline, the advanced network and technology for first responders. Learn more at verizon.com/frontline.
Hello and welcome to this very special crossover edition of Policing Matters, of Inside EMS, and of Better Every Shift. I am the host of the EMS One Stop podcast, Rob Lawrence, standing in for Chris Ceballero, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us and welcome my guests who are also our co-hosts, Jim Dudley and Aaron Zamzow. Gentlemen, welcome.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having us. Boy, we did this about a year ago and it just seems like yesterday, and you know how much some things have changed and how much they've kind of stayed the same. And it's great to see you guys.
Time is moving on, obviously, and we're now coming up to the 23rd anniversary of 9/11, of that tragic event that not only, of course, was in New York, but also in Virginia and in Pennsylvania. And sometimes those latter two kind of fade into the memory. And of course, we remember all of those events that occurred. And we're really going to talk about some of the lessons identified and moving forward later on in the show. But I think it's just kind of worthy remembering that one of the things that struck me when I was thinking about today's show is that 23 years on, we're already going from memory into history. And as I said before we started recording, we have some high school, well, for all high school students, this is history. For most college age folk, including seniors, this is also history and not memory. And therefore, we must make sure that we continue to reflect, remember, and from a public safety sense, learn. So, you know, Zam, where were you 23 years ago?
So I was living in Minneapolis at the time. I was not in the fire service, and I was I was in court that day. Long story short, I worked in a bar restaurant, and they got pinched for serving minors. You know, the way that systems work, right? It goes, Jim could be like, yeah, they card them at the door, but then the bartenders are ultimately responsible. So I was defending myself in court actually that day. So not a lot of people know that. So there was actually a lot of tension, believe it or not, in the courtroom. And I think they actually kicked us out and said, we're closing down the courthouse. So then I ran back to my place of employment and watched with horror as everyone else did that day.
Yeah, watching with horror. Jim, you were a serving cop in San Francisco, other end of the country, but the impact, I'm sure, was just as much.
Sure. I was captain at a station. I got a call at 6 a.m. saying, hey, Cap, turn on the TV. I hadn't gone out the door for work yet. And when I first heard the reports, there was no video. They were talking about a small plane that crashed into the tower. And I imagined it was an accident, that it was a small prop job that went off course and hit the tower. And then amazement, shock, disbelief when the second plane hit. And they had video, and it was stunning. I remember the videos afterwards when they briefed President Bush during the collision, and his reaction was stunned. And I know he was criticized for it, but I completely sympathize with his reaction. It's an unbelievable, unprecedented event. Unless you go back to something like Pearl Harbor, but in our lifetime, we hadn't seen anything like it. And it showed us the change in the world that was coming.
I think I'll pick up on that, changing the world. Jim, I was actually as far east as you were west on that day. And actually, I was an officer in the British Army working for a major general in a 2-star headquarters. And for the many veterans that I know are listening will know that any military headquarters is abuzz with activity, whether it's people coming and going, whether it's briefings going on, phones, faxes, telexes at the time, whatever. Of course, that day, that moment was absolute silence as we watched open-mouthed the television unfolding in the US And I remember that, about an hour later, that we were stunned into silence, and everybody's thinking, well, what's going to happen next? And of course, what happened next is the noise resumed, the tempo increased, the planning doubled, tripled, quadrupled. And actually, that was the start of what was, for both the UK and, of course, the US, a 20-year conflict that's at an end now, or is it? And so that really marked the start of a long time activity, not only for public safety internally in the US, but obviously for the militaries of allies as well. And so that was a seminal moment, as we remember. And so, we lost folk on 9/11, and also veterans perished in order to maintain the freedom that we all, the US, we all enjoy. And so that, for me, was one of those moments, markers in history. I mentioned the fact that, for some, it's going from memory to history. And of course, the other thing that we were reflecting on before we started recording is, for some firefighters in FDNY particularly, we're 23 years on, they're actually coming up for retirement. Obviously, there are those that, have very sadly succumbed to all sorts of illness and long-term effects. But then we're coming up to retirement time. So again, another, I suspect, milestone is approaching us. But Zam, you were just at FDNY, I think.
Yeah. I was just there this past weekend, doing, believe it or not, some health and wellness seminars with the First Responder Center for Excellence, and the conversations that I got to have with a lot of their members, just not only about 9/11, just about health in general. First and foremost, it's, cancer is an epidemic in the fire service, and I think police and EMS, we're going to start to see, obviously, just due to the stress of the job and lack of sleep, and we're going to really start to see those cancer numbers increase. In New York, it's already there. You can't walk down I was at the Rock, they call it, and at that training center, everybody is either battled the cancer themselves, has a family member that's been on the fire department that has, or knows somebody that is currently going through treatment. There is a captain, or somewhere on the Far East Side. His wife works in a hospital, and he says every Tuesday he takes the kids to see her, and the cancer ward is on on that same level as a cafeteria. And he says, I've never been there and not seen someone from FDNY there. And so I think just the ramifications of that event were still being seen, and we can't forget that. There, it's really difficult, and it's just something that gave me a great perspective. A lot of their firefighters now, they were maybe even getting on the job then. They were on the mound at some point, and they're having health issues, lung related issues, cancers. And then, of course, the trauma, the physical, the mental, and the emotional trauma, going to hundreds of different funerals. And, I think at the time we do whatever we can to survive. And as time goes by, those scars really start to, have more effect. And so for me, it was just in my face a little bit more. And it comes at a great time for us from the standpoint of being able to convey what I felt and saw. And, everyone from, someone picked me up from the airport to took me back to the airport, who is waiting on retirement because their lungs are shot, or shoulders and knees and are fried. And, part of that too is they had then COVID hit, they had a hiring freeze. So I think the biggest, takeaway for me was, we cannot forget how much all of these people sacrificed, not only that day, but then, the epic way they recovered, right? Like, if you think about the ramification and watch those videos again, like, that devastated a huge area downtown, and the town, and I think the country kind of got behind that rebuild. And even though physically the buildings are there, we got to remember mentally, emotionally, and even, on the health side, we got to continue to support that, and them and first responders in general. Because it's, as I go around the country and travel and talk on this, I mean, first responders are getting beat up, and both, I think, Jim, you can attest for this, police are really getting a bad rap, not only physically, mentally, but then, socially. And, I think we just have to pause, and hopefully 9/11 gives everybody a point and a place to reflect and say, there are military that are still fighting. There are families that indirectly have been affected and still are to this day. We can't forget about that.
I mean, carrying on from what Sam said, Jim, obviously not only are you the Policing Matters podcast host, but also you're a university lecturer, and you spend a lot of time making an impression on the youth of this generation. I mean, how do you reflect what Sam's just said onto your sort of new cohort of students, for example?
Yeah, well, it's no wonder that we're having real issues in recruiting, not just in police, but in fire, dispatch, of course, as well. And I think, we're so far away, 23 years from 9/11. There's that apathy that's set in, and my students are all maybe early 20s at most, so they have no concept of what happened on 9/11. And I think sometimes the message is diluted through politics or through immigration issues and things like that. And so when we try to talk about it in class, we try to piece it together with images about what the situational awareness was at the time, that it wasn't just a flash attack, but that we could, if we had a good sense of intelligence, that we could see it build up to where 9/11 occurred. And I think we're falling back into that apathy. It's hard to get the students to think about that there could be another attack. But I think worldwide, we're seeing the unrest in the Middle East. We've seen the Hamas attack, and it's really interesting seeing the response across the country at universities where students are protesting, maybe not fully aware of all the issues. And again, you put campus police in the middle between students and activists and a message that they want to convey at a university level. So for me, it's a fine line to walk to explain what happened, explain the political ramifications, and then talk about today when we have really porous borders. We have immigration issues across the world, not just in America. So we've been lucky. We've had incidents where in Canada, in the UK, in America, threats have been thwarted by having good intelligence and by having people working behind the scenes. And that's got to continue. And we've got so many options available to us today to increase that intelligence. I think we're missing out on using everything we have as a resource.
Actually, that's a great segue, Jim. We can come back to talk about where we are in the here and now, but let's just take a moment to listen to this message from our sponsor.
We honor and remember all those who answered the call that day, and all the first responders who continue to do so today. To the firefighters, police officers, paramedics, and dispatchers who took an oath to serve, and all those on the front lines who carried out their mission when America needed them most, we salute you and remain committed to you. Your mission is our purpose. Thank you from the people who work on Verizon Frontline. We vow to never forget.
And Jim was just kind of leading off there before the break about, it's been 23 years. Have we actually taken away those lessons and learned them? And I'm a big proponent of the fact sometimes we identify lessons, we don't necessarily learn them. But Jim, carry on your sort of train of thought there.
Yeah, AI is huge. We're only seeing the crest of it. Mm-hmm. And the advantages with AI and linking real-time crime centers to ALPRs, license plate readers, body-worn cameras, fixed cameras from business communities, about residential communities that can share their own video platforms. We could link together crimes and stop potential terrorist threats before they happen, but they certainly have great evidentiary practices that can show us who the suspects were after the fact. It's a little late, but we saw from the Boston Marathon bombing all the video that was pieced together that helped catch the Sarnoff brothers, or at least one of them. And I think we're not taking advantage of that. We have a governor in California who's prohibited use of AI, facial recognition, things like that could really help. So hopefully we're using it behind the scenes, maybe with our federal partners. I just had Mike Senna, the director of the NICRIC, the National Center for Intelligence in Northern California. He's also the HIDA director, the High Intensity Drug Threat Intervention nationally. So I know they are keeping track of the drug supply that's coming through across the borders and across our shipping lanes. And I think, as we knew from 9/11, that there are overlays of those kinds of things about money-making opportunities for transnational groups that are threats to our country. And we need someone, and hopefully DOJ, Department of Justice, is there coordinating these efforts to really get all of these different venues together to synthesize the information and help identify threats.
And actually, by the time this particular vodcast goes to air, we would have actually been to and reported from the Real-Time Crime Center conference, which is taking place in Phoenix. And I'm going to be down there doing some video capture and hopefully a little bit of reporting. And so that will come certainly to policeone.com very, very soon. So look out and listen in for that as well. Zam, I mean, 23 years on, what's the biggest lesson that we have identified and also learned from?
I think to piggyback with Jim, the technology side in the fire service, I think we're even probably a little more apprehensive in certain instances to use technology. But there are some where I've seen, drone usage. When you look at search and rescue, when you look at, in a case like the World Trade Center, you could have drones up to really size up what you're doing from a standpoint of what you're up against, from seeing, safety and where the fire is and possible outlets for rescue. So I think in that manner, the fire service is starting to embrace technology a little bit better. I think the other thing that we are doing well is, and Jim and Robbie, we all talked about this, off camera a little bit, about agencies are starting to work together more. Now, are we to a point where that's really, really solid? I don't think so. But, when you look at like active threats and terrorism, police and fire, I know we're doing joint drills now, at least even on a local basis. I know nationally there's been some things that'll help with the command, process. Talking with some of the people at FDNY, they lost both of their command posts when the buildings went down. And I think we've learned from that. Whether we're applying it or not, I think slowly but surely you're starting to see that. Technology helps us do that too. I also look at, the health and wellness side of this in recovery, using, now what we know these things based off of, the months and months of cleanup. We now know we need respiratory protection in those environments, and we can use a lot of different ways to measure that and technology to do that. We also, need to just embrace that. And that's the hard part. Some departments say they can't afford it. Some people, they can, and then they don't use it, right? Or they don't update it. So that's what we see. I think there's some really positive things that have come from that, meaning, just the communication, the application of it, of course, as time goes on, we get a little bit better and better and better. And unfortunately, you see, and Jim, you can probably agree with this, or would probably agree, that every time we have an event like this, we need to really dissect it and learn from it. And not only do we need to remember it from those souls that we lost, but we also need to remember it from what lessons we can learn and take. And if we stop doing that, even to this day, we have the video, we have the firsthand stories, we have, now this new technology. We need to see how we can layer that to get better at our responses for these.
I'm just going to sort of pick up on a couple of things both of you said there. Firstly, offering is coming up on our various platforms. We have a webinar coming up on cybersecurity, and whilst it's something that you can't see, it's actually an attack that's going on probably as we speak. It's happening all the time, and as public safety agencies, we have to safeguard and secure our own information, our own data, to enable us to continue doing our jobs. And also to enable us to continue to detect crime, to identify, looking at the population at risk, those public health issues, etc. So actually, this is something that we have to protect and secure. You also mentioned drones, and I'm going to pick up on that. Also, another thing that we're attending shortly is there's a drone conference coming up actually here in Las Vegas shortly, and I should be doing that. And they're going to spend a lot of time talking about DFR, drones as first responders, and there's a lot of coverage on that. And I was listening to a webinar the other day from actually my old medical director, Dr. Joseph Ornato, who is a commercial rated pilot and also an FAA rated drone pilot. And of course, one of the issues that he was talking about, and that's going to be discussed at this conference, is the kind of fact around that we now have public safety drones, whether it's police intelligence gathering drones, whether it's delivering something to the fireground or to the medical response. We still have a lot of work to do with the FAA around flying over the sort of that over the horizon flying. And I noticed from the conference agenda, there's a lot of discussion between public safety experts and the FAA about how do we get over this. Of course, we talk about the technology of having a drone nest where the drone can self-deploy, but the FAA still says you've got to be up on the roof looking around before you press go. So we've got some things we have to fix. And of course, one of the things they're quite rightfully concerned about is that whilst you're not going to jump into commercial aircraft, I suspect, it's the amount of police, fire, EMS, helicopters, commercial helicopters. I mean, where I live, I can't look out of my window without seeing some sort of tourist helicopter flying by the window. So, there's a real concern there, but also it's something we have to get over and solve in order to continue the motion forward. So, I mean, drones are part of the intelligence gathering future, part of the first response future, but I think there's still a little bit of work to do.
Yeah, very much so. The fact, though, we're talking about it and they're having conferences on it, right? The government agencies, I think, also have to start to embrace that as well. So I think, it doesn't happen fast enough, right, guys? Like we see this. It's been 23 years. We know that we probably these conversations have been going on for 10, and it may be another 5 until we start to get policies and procedures on it altogether. But at least we have to force those conversations a little bit more. The other part too, and I didn't even mention, is, from us on the fire side, hazmat situations, we can use technology a lot more. So these drones or robots we're seeing, we're able to take our personnel out of maybe a hazardous situation. And same thing with PD, using, the technology to not replace, but just try to reduce the risks. And isn't that's what we all try to do. The risk is going to be there, even with EMS. We're going into situations a lot of times where there are mental health issues and we don't know where that person is, as far as, are they willing or will they go hurt themselves or us? So yeah, I think, departments need to keep pushing that. Leadership needs to keep pushing that and keep having these conversations.
And of course, to make the link between 9/11 23 years ago and what we're talking about now, of course, is that technology, intelligence gathering capability has now come on in leaps and bounds in order to help us ensure that something like this never happens again. So there is a conscious link for those that are listening between the first half and, of course, the second half. But Jim, you've had some amazing guests on talking about sort of the advent of technology, particularly for policing. But what's been most memorable for you?
Yeah, no, I think your point about DFR, drones as first responders, is huge. And I know there are exceptions to that visual line of sight rule that are happening. I've been to Skydio and Axon to watch how their drones respond from a rooftop nest, and how I think we're still years away from them being autonomous, that they could fly on their own. We're seeing them dispatched from real-time crime centers. And a couple of departments have been out in front of this. Chula Vista in California has been using Live 911, where they'll send a drone out in advance. And to Zam's point, post 9/11, we got together, we were working as a team from San Francisco to apply for grants. So police, fire, public health, public works, anybody involved in the mayor's office, executive level, got together and we took all of these scenarios and based our own readiness, our preparedness, our training, our equipment, all of that, and how could we respond to terrorist threats, whether they would be any of the explosive situations or hazmat situations, nuclear, any of those possibilities. And the ability now with a drone to stay remote from the site is huge. We don't know about the radiological aspect or a hazmat or biological threat. Right after 9/11, we're doing these exercises and Zam wanted to stay right up on it and look at it. They wanted to be there. I think in the few years post, and I think now we're more comfortable from observing from a distance. And we've seen from active shooters, some of these lunatics will set up secondary devices or even booby traps to get more first responders after the fact. And I understand at some of the larger active shooter situations we've seen that reluctance for fire and EMS to make their entry until it's an all clear. And that's because a lot of times we don't know if there's a secondary shooter or if there are booby trap devices, things like that. That's where these drones are so valuable, and the capabilities of hover, of breaking windows, of making contact with a suspect, visual line of sight, audio. We don't have to throw a throw phone through a window anymore. These drones can do it all. I mean, I think we've had the controversy of arming drones in San Francisco for about 15 days. We got the authority to use an explosive device on a bomb robot or drone, I forget which. And the world reacted and we got shut down. I was amazed that it got the consideration that it did. But that may be coming down the road. When we talk about things like 9/11 and the health effects 23 years later, we've got to do something to make a buffer zone between our live responders and the unknown threats.
Yeah. Respond when we know we need to. We risk a lot to save a lot. But if we don't know what we're saving, or we don't know, in some cases, we'll just go risk blindly. And I think what you said is this is going to give us an opportunity to maybe make a little bit more calculated risk, and even Rob, like from a triage standpoint, you could send drones in to know kind of what you have in certain rooms. And, that way you can set up your retrieval process, right? With police and fire working together, you can have, EMS staged, ready to go for certain things that you see from these drones. So I think, it can go, it can be very, very, helpful for all agencies combined, but we just need to keep pushing.
And I think in places like Denmark, we're already seeing drones delivering defibrillators. And of course, inevitably that will happen here. The next big thing in the EMS world is whole blood, the delivery of whole blood. It's a game changer. And I fully expect to see that's a prime target for drone delivery as well, of course, because, we have a lot of EMS, 15,000 EMS systems registered in the country, believe it or not. If they all had blood, there'd be no blood left. So you have to therefore have some sort of distribution set up to deliver that. And of course, technology will enable us to do that. So as we come to the end, and obviously reflecting on the remembrance of part one and the forward-looking aspect of part two, what are your final thoughts for this particular edition, Zam?
Well, I think, we talked about technology, and we talked about not forgetting and really trying to hit home, the significance of that event. And so I like to challenge that this up and coming generation that maybe wasn't involved in 9/11 as much. I mean, they're affected a lot more than they believe. So my first challenge would be is to really find out what effect it has had on things around them, number one. And then number two, we talk about the technology charge. That is the generation that can lead that and can develop that. There might be actual agencies or sections within departments that are just technology, and that's what they're doing is drones and finding ways to keep the front lines safe by using technology. So I challenge them to come up with those ways and serve in unique ways. You don't have to be the front line in all cases. You could be support staff. You could be someone who specializes in health and wellness for first responders. But I know that, it's I'd say it's a caring generation. I think they've been, exposed to a lot, but they're fairly resilient. And I think that they're, that they really do want to serve. And so I think they have to just think out of the box a little bit and find creative ways to do that. And for the generation that does remember it and that were there, just don't forget all of the different people that were affected by it. Rob, you had said it's just not about those that were there, at the mound, or on the mound, where the trade towers were. There's also the Pentagon building, and then there was those heroes that we lost that stopped the threat. Ask questions, have conversations, look at those videos. For me, I got firsthand to talk to these firefighters that were responding. I talked to a couple that were getting off shift that day, and I said, well, what was it like? Do you mind me asking? And they're like, no, it was crazy. They were watching this go, and you know what they did? They commandeered buses and they drove straight down towards that massive fiery ball of a building. They were supposed to be going home, and they all knew this isn't going to end well for a lot of people. Even when the first tower went down, the guy's like, we're on a bus. We're still going towards it. People are flying and running by us, and we don't know what we're assigned to. We're going towards it. And, that mentality it's tough. It's, I hope I would have that same mindset. I think I would, being in the fire service for 20 plus years. But I think we have to remember that that's what people do. And what that city has done, what that fire department has done, we can't forget about that. And we also have to remember all those other people that were involved with it and somehow find a way to step up.
Strong words, Sam. Jim?
Yeah, I would love to see a national, well, actually a worldwide shift from response. We are so response driven. We can't wait for another 9/11 to happen to really decide and do some things. We need to be more prevention driven. And that starts with politicians, legislators, the public at large. It's really hard to justify expenses for prevention because you can't see it. It's hard to quantify what we prevented, but we've got so many opportunities to use technology. Rob, you mentioned cybersecurity. We only touched on it a bit, but that could be a crippling action to a nation, to a world. We've seen some blips on our cell phones and our internet service and things like that. I don't think those are accidents. I don't know if they're issues with the grid or if they are probing attacks. And it can destroy our economic cybersecurity, our communications. It can really open up the doors to mass attacks. And I know nobody wants to think about that when it's not happening, but it's even worse trying to gather ourselves and respond after the fact. So I think we need to be more mindful of, luck and hope are not good strategies at preventing the next attack. I think we really need to be prevention minded.
Thank you, Jim, and extremely impactful last comment there, which I'm sure we'll clip and use going forward, because I think that's exceptionally valid. And again, remember, we have a cybersecurity webinar coming up with some extremely capable experts. So we'll talk about this. And the threat's real. It's out there. It's happening in and around us. I can't follow you with those wise words, so I'm just going to give you a poem because, again, as the Brits, I'm this sort of 9/11 outsider, if you like. But actually, the British Festival of Remembrance has a one-paragraph poem that we all recite, and I think it's exceptionally appropriate in the remembrance sort of phase of this. And it quite simply says, "They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, and we will carry their legacy forward into today, tomorrow, and the years ahead." So that's been our 9/11 broadcast for 2024, 23 years after the event. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this very special edition of all of our podcasts.
Thanks, guys. Awesome. You guys are great and true professionals. And, just thanks for the opportunity. It's great to see you guys.
Same. Great. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Sam. Good talking to you.
Good. So on behalf of Zam, Jim, and myself, thank you. Catch us all on our podcast channels. Make sure that you like and subscribe. And so on behalf of all of us, thanks very much, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.